Is Darkest Dungeon hard? A quick peruse through the Steam reviews on the negative ones, you'll eventually notice two trends. RNG, random number generator, and how the game is just too hard, where the game is hard. That is why this video is two parts. One to talk about if and then how Darkest Dungeon is hard, and then the second part will be related to RNG. RNG will be a touchier video, hence why I need more time before I take a deep dive into that controversial nightmare. Depending on who you ask, RNG is single-handedly probably clearly one of the dividing factors among this game, so I need to dedicate a whole video to that to really flesh out my ideas before I dig my own grave. However, we'll first talk about the hardness of Darkest Dungeon. Before we dive deep though, into this bloody abyss, please like, comment, and subscribe. Some big channel updates are happening and I prefer you stick around and see. Thank you. And as always, if you like the channel, please support on Patreon and we'll get some private content going there. Now, on to how rock hard Darkest Dungeon is. Answering simply, yes, Darkest Dungeon is hard in the first playthrough. If not playing on the hardest difficulty on your second playthrough, it is significantly easier than the first. This is why a majority of the player base never finishes the game. According to Steam, 3.1% make it through the default settings /end, though it's most likely higher than that. I don't trust Steam stats, but that's also a separate video about how Steam stats always appear to be off. But even in a world where, let's just say that's doubled, it's only 6.2%. So at best case, and I'm just kind of making it up to be honest, less than a 10% of the player base finishes the game. And I kind of believe that in all honesty. So we're going to talk about why is the success rate so low. First and foremost, a contributing factor to getting your teeth kicked in is lack of knowledge. Darkest Dungeon punishes heavily and mercilessly without prior knowledge. Not knowing what enemies do, kills you. Not knowing what curios do, kills you. Not knowing what good party combos are, kills you. Fighting bosses, kills you. Retreating can kill you. Stress will kill you. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, and it takes about a whole playthrough or looking up a lot of information and videos to counteract these situations and gaps in your knowledge. The idea of knowledge itself falls into two categories, puzzle and strategic. And since puzzles, like real life, are pretty easy once you figure them out and with mass repetition. Once you first get a puzzle and it stays the same, it takes you an exorbitant amount of time to solve it. But once you solve it, you get faster the second, then the third, and then the fourth, because it's always the same puzzle and you find better ways to become more efficient, kind of like a Rubik's Cube. Now, strategic is where obviously things are working against you, you have to constantly be shifting, and it's not the same puzzle every time. Darkest Dungeon does have both, and they are both to varying degrees, and we'll talk about throughout the video. What Darkest Dungeon definitely is not in terms of hard is what I call mechanical difficulty, such as Twitch shooters or rogue games that rely on reflexes and aiming. These are your CSGOs, your Rainbow Six Vegas, Hades, Bullet Hell, even Dark Souls-like games. These stay difficult because of high level of reflexes, mechanical knowledge, and they do take strategic knowledge as well, but not so much the puzzles. And the puzzles that do exist in that game are obviously significantly easier second time through. This is why these games tend to stay hard and have high skill ceilings that you don't exactly see in Darkest Dungeon at moments once you make multiple playthroughs. Darkest Dungeon for the most part is a two-punch kind of setup. First time, figuring out the whole game, and second time is doing it on the hardest difficulty since it makes you work on a time crunch and a hero loss limit. People who tell you Darkest Dungeon is not hard mean you can eventually make the game's threats to you a significantly low factor. If anyone tells you Darkest Dungeon was easy from the get-go, likes one of two things, to lie, or likes to be a prodigy at games, and you must hail all respect to them. Though for the most part they're probably lying. So as stated above, why is this game so hard? Another huge reason is repetition and grinding in the game. Now, grinding and repetition alone is not difficult. So we're going to talk about why that factor just amplifies the difficulty and the frustration many of the new players in this game tend to feel. Imperfections are found once a party or playstyle is introduced to similar situations over and over again, or against entirely new enemy compositions as you level up, or just the RNG of an enemy composition. Thus, even if you think you figured something out for about 20 weeks, once you introduce new enemies, you have to now go back and repeat your lineup if it wasn't good enough the first time. This means even if you start to figure something out, the game will eventually show you the lack of planning or inefficiency in that party. The one party you're using may have worked well in the Apprentice Ruins, but now they're struggling in the Veteran Wield, and you have to go through the whole process of getting your butt kicked in again, dying, and repeating. So even though you are progressing, it's almost like you're starting the game over and over and over again the more you learn new enemies, bosses, and up the difficulty. This continuing barrage of new skills, lineups, enemies, and bosses getting constantly stronger asks you to learn more and adapt to new situations all the time. Then as a final screw you, the darkest dungeons are grueling, different enemies, and make you lose people purely on the idea of just backing out of the dungeons. So even if you just want to recon with a couple of people and deal with the fact you're going to lose those provisions, not so fast, someone's going to have to go die probably. This then makes you go back into the grind machine and allows for those repetitive chances to happen again, which can be exhausting emotionally and just in terms of your time. This is often the part where people tell you to get good at the game, which can be incredibly frustrating since you feel like the game is against you and doesn't offer much insight on how to get better immediately. Also, it's not pure skill reflex based, so you can't really just try harder at the end of the day. No amount of cocaine is certainly going to help you click faster to get through the darkest dungeon. Well, it might help you click faster, but it's certainly not going to help you probably solve your issues. Another facet is there are so many things to balance, and how do you prepare for events you simply don't know that are coming. We have no idea how much gold we're gonna need, how many heirlooms, what skills we want to max, which quirks are good and which quirks are even out there, which trinkets are the best ones on which heroes, what events are gonna happen, and what do we have to collect or destroy. There's so much to go search and record that it really is mind-boggling on how much you have to remember and utilize to progress forward. With all this being said, and not even diving into the deepest corner of aspects of difficulty, comes another obstacle and can present a challenge in a good/bad way at moments. Unlike at the club, where grinding may be preferred at moments, get ready to grind your fingers down to stubs in a blood-filled rage. Even when you're a veteran at the game, without walking or animation mods, it can take a while to progress through places and to fight. For your information, if you're considering mods that don't break the game, I would heavily recommend walk faster and speed up animation mods only after your first playthrough. If you're on a super tight schedule, pick the walk faster mod, but I still recommend keeping on the animation one because there's some cool abilities, and if you haven't seen them a million times, the speed up animations will leave you wondering what the heck just happened. And if you don't know what happened, you can't learn which skills do which, you're going to put yourself in that knowledge category where you have a gap, you're going to get continually pummeled in the face. So first time through, don't speed up animations, but after that, feel free to once you learned all of them. That's besides the point though. The amount of anti-grind and speed up mods out there hint at yes, this game can take a while to complete, especially if you don't know what you're doing, and even if you do, it still takes X period of time because you have to do X period of dungeons, get to certain resolves, and even if you keep a tight-knit group of about 20 to 22 heroes, you can't really lose anybody and you have to finish quickly. In my hardest difficulty playthrough, I do finish the game in between 50 to 60 weeks, which is pretty fast, but that's probably on edge of how fastest you can do it casually. There are ways to speedrun it faster, one via glitches, and two, I could have probably gone and tried it at week 40 and stuff like that, but on the weird off chance I would have failed, what's the point? Then I would have wasted more time. So casually, 40 to 60 weeks is probably the quickest you're going to do, and that's still probably 20 to 30 hours of gameplay most likely. So does grinding mean the game is hard? So grinding doesn't mean the game is hard, just like ordering a drink at a bar. It's not hard to do, but it feels like forever until it arrives. To simplify the equation for you, the more you suck, the exponential increase in time it takes to finish the game. Why is it not linear? Because losing one person at a high level is way worse than losing lower level people you may or may not have even wanted around in the first place. Also, a specific class dying can set you back even further as you wait for them to arrive in the stagecoach, and possibly longer if they have devastating negative quirks on them. Passage of time does not mean hard, but it will compound on the already flawed areas if you haven't figured out how to fight well yet, or if you're low on money, or if you're barely holding on. Not that week 86 is harder than week 70 in most scenarios, it's just you haven't learned how to play the game well enough yet and you're still getting brutalized for it. Thus, you are forced to bring up lower people in high level dungeons due to the mismatch of resolve levels and the inability to drop down resolve depending on the difficulty. I get through this massive rant to say one thing. The first time through will be the most brutal, and you have to ask yourself if you're willing to spend the time to learn by the errors or to look it up. I'll let that be your choice because it's your own personal playing experience. I would say though, play the game through fairly blind, or at least do everything blind once before you look it up. The bosses are very repetitive, so feel free to look up a bulletproof strategy after you venture past the first boss, because you'll fight them a second and third time. It's not really a spoiler. By the second and third time, like I said, look up a party that reliably does it so you don't really have to worry about failing. However, the final levels of the game, I would highly recommend trying to do blind through the whole time, because those are experiences you're never really going to be able to get back, and they are truly something I appreciate and remember fondly. At the end of the day, Darkest Dungeon is a hard game, in my opinion at first, but like most puzzles, with repetition they get significantly easier and begin to make sense. There's still strategy in the game, and you can't take in the same party everywhere and expect the same result every time, which is why this game is actually so good. That may be infuriating at first because you're trying to find a party you can grab onto to ride you through the whole game, but it's not going to happen. But you can eventually appreciate the diversity that is going to bring you. The game's biggest flaws are beating you senseless for the 1,000 things you don't know, and then you have to grind all day because of it. My first playthrough easily took me 50 to 60 hours to complete because of all the errors I was making, and the worse you do in the early game, the worse you're set up for in the late game. And it sounds obvious, but your second time through is going to be significantly better. And as I said about the second playthrough, it was probably about half the time and definitely 1/8 of the headache the second time through. Any run after the first is really enjoyable because you get to utterly obliterate the bosses and enemies that cause you so much pain in the beginning of the game. The game becomes relatively easy, but you definitely can't be lazy on your party structures or not killing certain enemies because they will come back to bite you, and that's the strategic part of it. Because if you could stay lazy the whole time, that would mean the game's more of a puzzle than it is a strategic game. If you were asking me for a percentage, I honestly wouldn't know, but the game's not purely puzzle, and it's definitely not purely strategic based either though. To segue into the next video, sometimes you do everything right, but the dice don't roll your way. Thank you for watching, and stick around for that part 2.